decision-making positions in the civil service. So when the public sector then issued that policy, it was based on that research, and then that led the way to a policy on 30% participation of women at decision-making levels in the private sector, although that's not been quite as, I think, impactful. Entrepreneurial skills and empowering women. We've moved very much away from, at least at the UN level, from implementation. At the lower level, we go upstream, we try and influence policy. Towards a national action plan for empowering to empower single mothers. That was based on some research that we did on the definition of single mothers back in 2008 to 2010. Recently, I think it was last year, the Prime Minister, because the ministry has been somewhat lagging behind in terms of efforts that it's taken on gender, they recently announced that the action plan that came out of this project would be something that the Ministry of Women is implementing now. And the Prime Minister announced that at the UN General Assembly last year. There was a study on increasing women's participation in the labor force. And that really, I think that might be one, because there's such a huge emphasis on increasing women's economic participation and boosting the country's growth through increasing the number of women in the labor force. This report, most of the reports that come out of these projects can be downloaded from our website, which is www.undp.org.my. And most of these studies, I think, do, especially in particular this one, on the labor force, gives you entry points into work that you're doing, because there's mention of the care economy and the double burden that women face in the labor force. There are entry points to, for example, there's an increase in, say, there are recommendations in there which we've encouraged and we continue to use as a basis for decisions that the government makes with regards to women's policies on women and the entry into the labor force. So those are projects that we've tied up. The ones in red are projects that we're currently trying to develop with the government, or that we are currently. The one on strengthening and enhancing inclusiveness of women towards an equitable society in the 11th Malaysia Plan is really is on gender mainstreaming. How do you mainstream gender in all areas of the government's 11th Malaysia Plan? The government has gender focal points in each ministry, but they're not very effective. How do we make them more effective? How do we need to handhold them? It turns out that a lot of them, even though they have gender focal points, they don't really know how to do their job. How do we make them more effective, and how do we enable them to do their jobs? How do we provide them an enabling environment so that they're able to do their jobs? It's a 4-year project. It's something that we're waiting on the Ministry of Women to sign off on. But essentially, I mean, and these projects range between, we put in terms of money value, at least financial value, we put in about $600,000 US. Funding-wise, the way it's broken up, because we're an upper middle income country, Malaysia, funding is broken down. We cost share our projects. So the less developed you are, the more money UN puts in. The more developed you are, the less money the UN puts in, because in theory you should be able to fund your own development projects, right? That's the rationale that the UN uses. So in Malaysia, the cost sharing breakdown is 60-40, which means the government puts in 60%, UN puts in another 40%, and then that's how these projects are funded. So all our projects have buy-in from government, which is why all our projects need to a certain extent, they need to be articulated. The need needs to be articulated by government. Government needs to say, okay, this is where we're having problems, this is where we would like some assistance from the UN, and this is how we move. So every project has a partner, has a little champion within government, every project has a home, every project, in theory, then has the opportunity to be scaled up, right? So if it works, if it's a success, if the outcomes are positive, then there is a space in terms of including the recommendations in policy, including the recommendations in future projects so that you can scale up these initiatives. So gender mainstreaming is one. We Care is women's economic empowerment with a care component to it. We're looking at care, including care components. And that really looks at, and that's at the subnational level, which means it's at the state level. Sarawak says, hey, we've got a lot of single mothers, we've got a lot of, we're having trouble moving them out of poverty. A large number of single mothers are poor. If you look at your bottom 40 households, if you're looking at poor families, they primarily are female-headed households, right? And so we don't know what to do about them, or we have a rough idea. We want to set up this little community center for them. But, you know, so what we try and do is we try and situate the problem within research and larger context, and then scale it up and help them with it. But it's in projects like this where, because in terms of value, like I said, because the projects are about between 600,000, between 300,000, 600,000, and $1 million US isn't considered big for the UN. Big is energy and environment projects, which are, what, 10 million, 5 million, right? $5 million US. They span 5 years. Those are big projects for us. So in human development, our projects aren't necessarily that big. They can be shorter, but they do try and, I guess, be a little bit more holistic. So we don't try and do just implementation sides, like, oh, we need help training 5 mothers or 10 single mothers. We try and address the systemic problems, and we try and affect the system. And so, in that sense, a component of a project could be a study. If that study then leads into, you know, a pilot or policies that or policy recommendations that need to be tested, so they can so there's smaller parts, smaller components. They're an outcome of a larger project. So we try and stay away from micro projects to that extent, at least at the UNDP level. And that's where there is an opportunity. For example, if we're trying to do something, if there is a demand, or if there's a suggestion in that sense from academics, or saying, you know, that we're doing research in this area, which is why it's important, I think, to sustain relationships, because we need to know what you're working on so that we can incorporate this research into, say, upcoming projects, if they're suggested by government, or there's an opportunity for us to raise these with our stakeholders. Then we can say, hey, there's an opportunity for a baseline study on this in this area, because we know that there's certain academicians or academic institutions that are already working in these areas. So we know who to approach. The important thing to note is that when we do hire consultants, and consultants are usually hired by the UN because our hiring processes are less cumbersome than government, it's an open tender. So everybody has to submit an application. It's an open process. Whether you're selected or not is, again, up to a panel of, you know, it has to be fair and open. It's an open tender process in that sense. It's an open hiring process. But at the end of the day, we need to get as many people who are working in that field, you know, to apply for for these opportunities. And then there's the other report the other thing that we're trying to develop with Sarawak. Again, Sarawak has mentioned that it's really interested in moving things along with regards to gender, status of gender equality for Sarawak, because there's no data on women that's quite incomprehensively available for Sarawak. How the UN is set up here. So we have, like I said, we're one organization as part of a larger extension of UN agencies in the country. We have UNDP. Then there's UNICEF, which whose mandate is to work primarily on children. World Health Organization, health. UNHCR does refugees. UNFPA, population. And sexual reproductive health rights. So they primarily push and advocate on issues like abortion, on issues like child marriage, so that falls within their mandate. It's interesting though, I want to, is this being live streamed, Zuni?
Yeah.
Can you hold this, can you pause it? Okay. So in this particular, I want to talk about what UNFPA has been doing and how it's been doing something with an issue that's been pretty contentious. They work on abortion rights. Abortion to a certain, for the most part, is a very sensitive topic in this country. The government doesn't like to say, hey, we make contraception available. Contraception, for the most part, only becomes available to women who are married, right? And in terms of abortion, it's it's legal if the pregnancy will cause harm to the mother, right? And you need a doctor to sign off on that before they conduct an abortion. And the method that they use for abortion has been to what's that? There's a medical term for it. Is to scrape out. Is to use the scraping method, and that's right, DNC. And it's an ancient method, right? From what I understand, at least, it's meant to be. There are much better methods to be used for abortion. You can use pills. You can use there are different ways to do it. And the DNC is basically belongs in a history museum as far as a lot of practitioners are concerned. But the abortion pill, is a two-step pill, which isn't allowed in Malaysia, of which only one is registered and legal in Malaysia, which you can get. The second one still needs to be registered. UNFPA has been working with government to the point where Ministry of Health now is interested in registering the second pill. Obviously, they won't publish this in newspapers and make this known, but UNFPA has been able to work and handhold Ministry of Health to the point where they're open to registering and looking at registering the second pill, and then saying, hey, you can now get abortion pills over the counter. This is a huge step for a country like Malaysia. This is, but the fact that UNFPA has been able to do that has been because they have a position of trust. One, they've managed to gain the trust of the Ministry of Health. They understand that Ministry of Health can be somewhat sensitive to criticism, doesn't quite know how to position itself sometimes. How do you deal with religious authorities? How do you deal with sometimes criticism from civil society? Can be quite harsh for them. But then you have, so what UNFPA has done in that situation is when they bring in stakeholders for discussion, they sit down and talk to stakeholders, try and make them understand what the position of the ministry is. They sit down with the ministry, try and, basically they prep everybody and they handhold most of these stakeholders, they handhold the ministry because they know that the ministry is, say, very sensitive to being attacked. So, and because of that, and because a lot of times civil servants don't know or how to position themselves without getting defensive, this is the role that UNFPA plays. And it's quite interesting because this is all done soft, it's a soft skill. This isn't done through media, this isn't done through statements, this is a soft skill and a hand-holding thing that UNFPA does, but they've been able to advance the issue on abortion rights to a point where you may be able to get abortion pills over the counter as you're able to do in Thailand. They brought in, international experts and whatnot. So the point is that, I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that no matter how sensitive the issue is, there is a way to push the agenda forward, right? You just have to find the right angle and the right position. So all of these agencies, we have UNU as well, the Administration for United Nations University and the World Food Program, but all these organizations come together in what's known as the UN country team. And the UN country team is headed by the UNDP Resident Representative, Michelle Giles McDonough. currently, and we convene, because we all have our little thematic areas that we work on, we convene in thematic groups like this in the event that we may need interagency work. Because UNICEF's mandate, say for example, is children, they specialize in child rights and children, UNDP does development, you know, and say UNHCR does work on refugees, and there's a strong gender theme in it. We convene thematic groups like this, where all agencies come in and say we need collaboration between agencies. These theme groups also have small amounts of funding. It's not big. So if you want to conduct micro experiments that push forward a particular research agenda, for example, to build your case so that you can show proof of concept, for example, you want to build proof of concept, you can write to any of these groups, for example, in particular the gender theme group or the human rights group, depending on what your angle is, and request for funding. Say we have this idea, this is what we want to do, this is how it ties into the 11th Malaysia Plan, the government's development priorities, this is what we can do, we propose to do, we'd like some funding. The funding within these theme groups isn't big, and it's on a first come, first served basis, but there is a little bit of amount of money that can be allocated to, and its allocation is less stringent than, say, for example, applying for international funding opportunities where the grants are worth US $250,000, right? So, and in the event that you have a particular research interest or a research proposal, we've also recently started building good relationships with Bursa, the private sector, different companies, and we may be able, if all else fails, even if the theme groups don't have any money left at that point when you're writing in, you may be able to you could write to us anyway, and we may be able to galvanize public-private partnerships or funding. We can reach out to the private sector for you to see if we can, if there are people who are interested in funding a particular project, because that's something that we do on a case-by-case basis, and it depends on if we can match suitable interests. So in that sense, you can try it. There's no harm done. There are international funding opportunities. The Fund for Gender Equality is a UN Women grant-making mechanism, and it looks at economic and political empowerment. So there are two big themes: economic empowerment, political empowerment. They've delivered $56.5 million US dollars. I focused on women's economic empowerment because at this stage, maternity protection, I think, closely relates to that. It's your strongest, I think, entry point, women's economic empowerment, to increase women's access and control over decision making. So you can, and these are usually worth, you can get up to 250,000 US dollars if your project is big. Trust Fund to End Violence Against Women. Again, all you need to do is Google. They have different application procedures and different cycles. So you will have these slides, so all you need to do is Google them, and you'll be able to get information on the different cycles, when the application times are. Usually, I think, Nareda, you usually get updates, right? They send you updates when they're looking, when there's a call for proposals. And they support a lot of the research that's been done. There's a lot of funding that's given to civil society, research institutions, and whatnot. And that's pretty much it. And this particular slide, I don't know, just in case, I just wanted to put it up there in case it was helpful. But this is how Malaysia does its planning. There are national policies which guide the implementation of particular efforts and initiatives. There's short term where they have an annual budget. Every year we have a new budget. In the medium term, we have, again, like I mentioned, the development plans. Like in this time, it's the 11th Malaysia Plan. It's good to link up research with government development priorities. If the government says there's not very much of a focus on gender in the 11th Malaysia Plan this time around, but there's a huge, but where it is brought up, where women are mentioned, is with an economic argument to it. There's an economic basis for wanting to improve the lives of women. Because women, they say, will contribute to the country's growth and development. Siloed as it is an entry point into looking for funding. And in the long term, of course, then you have your 10-year, 30-year plans. Yeah. Okay, and that's it. Thank you. Any questions?
Sorry, I noticed you don't have UNESCO there.
UNESCO. Because UNESCO doesn't have a country presence.
They have a commission.
Yeah. Sorry?
They have a UNESCO commission.
Yeah, but they're not based in the country, in Malaysia again.
So these are all.
These are.
The commission, the man who represents the commission is based there.
Yeah. Well, we haven't. That's the thing. UNESCO will come in and they will work on particular areas that they do. When there is a cross into, UN agencies are like any other agency. I think they sometimes tend to be a little siloed. So the way we're informed of what other agencies are working on is either through the theme groups, and if they're not part of that theme group, then they usually notify. Out of courtesy, they'll notify us and say, hey, this is what we're working on. Sometimes that information might get sent to the resident representative, but it might not filter down to us at the program manager level.
The reason I asked is because I know UNESCO, there's certain things that are overlapping. I just came back from a Bali meeting just a few days ago, and UNESCO, at least the guys in charge of the UNESCO base in Jakarta, is trying hard to push to engender the natural sciences, and they're trying to build clusters on interdisciplinary. And I wonder how that is going to work. I mean, because I'm here, of course I want something to do for Malaysia. So I don't know how that is going to work. If they don't come and then you end theme, and then you end gender theme, does it mean that UNESCO then will work alone on this engendering thing, or do you think they will come to the...
They work on regional efforts, generally. Their entry point is the region. And in that regard, if there is something, if for example you're working on including gender or mainstreaming gender into the natural sciences, and there are certain initiatives that are going on, then there needs to be a link up between all three parties, and then we can see how we can best support that initiative. But there needs, a lot of times, again, I mean, it's the UN, it's a huge bureaucratic animal. We have different arms, tentacles, and sometimes they don't connect. And, but that's not to say that we don't work together at all. There may be some miscommunication, sure, it's a huge animal, but at the same time, we do try our very level best to support other agencies that are doing work in the country or trying to push certain initiatives within the country or within the region. Any other questions? Yes.
The method you described when it was proposal for getting change through prepping people and holding hands, holding ministers' hands and so on. Do you see this as a method which can be used in getting changes in relation to maternity protection?
I think maternity protection is less sensitive than abortion rights in that sense. So it might be easier to be somewhat public about it. There's certain companies, especially bigger companies under Bursa, for example. Bursa is a huge supporter of, one, pushing women into leadership positions, getting women on boards. Maternity protection is a huge part of that. So you can leverage, I think, good private sector partners in that sense. And companies are proud to announce their work. If they've done something positive, it's something proud that they can announce as having taken leadership in, right? And that's, I think, one of the boons of working on a topic that's not so sensitive like abortion rights. Abortion rights, you announce it, and you'll probably get accused of trying to encourage children to have sex, So with maternity protection, yes.
But what about smaller businesses? Because even in Britain, regulation of smaller businesses is contentious.
In terms of regulation, I think there may be some issues, but in terms of the intersection of smaller businesses and maternity protection, I don't think the conversation has started up very much yet. It needs to start. Bianca was showing me yesterday the publication that a few people co-authored, including you, yes, on maternity protection in SMEs. I think that's a very interesting area, and I think there's a lot of potential in this country to really push that agenda. I think there needs to be, because for the most part, it's been focused on maternity protection efforts, maternity leave, you know, these family-friendly policies. A lot of them have been focused on big companies. It's not even penetrated, I hate the word, but it's not even penetrated into the SME area. And those conversations need to be had. There are particular, I think, organizations, forums that you can start initiating those conversations with. Because as you are all aware, the big block to moving the agenda forward is always businesses saying, well, this will cost us money. There's a financial imperative to not wanting to. So which is why the conversation has stayed within large corporations, and which is why it's been difficult to push the idea, because nobody's really thought about how to make it feasible for SMEs to include maternity protection and whatnot within their operations. So those conversations need to be had, and there is, I think, a space for that here.
So, sorry to push you, but where do you have ideas about where you would start to get that question, that issue on the agenda?
I'm no SME expert. I'm sure that there are certain, I mean, if you give me some time, I'd be able to do some research and then be able to tell you where I think it might be effective to enter into that, where your entry points are within that area. But there are authorities regulating SMEs, the establishment of SMEs, I think, who provide grants, startup grants, seed grants. And part of that could include a condition on, say if you start talking to them, it could include, and I'm just thinking completely, I'm just pulling this out of a hat right now. You know, it could include, for example, linking, attaching a seed grant for the establishment of SMEs with the inclusion of maternity protection in the startup, how to do that. And I think that's a big thing because people don't know how to do that, how to make it viable, how to make it possible. It seems so foreign and far away and something big companies should do, right? So linking, I think, grants to the inclusion of maternity protection might be one way. Talking to the authorities that do regulate SMEs might be another. I think engaging the Malaysian Employers Federation is a huge challenge, but a necessary one. And they work primarily with, there are a lot of factories as well that they work with, and those are primarily larger ones, but still, I think the reticence with which they, you know, could be, definitely needs to occur. There needs to be some awareness raising there. Yeah, so if you give me some time, I can get back to you and look at where, you know, there's some possible entry points into maternity protection, or including the maternity protection agenda with SMEs and expanding that into SMEs. But I'm not an expert in that field, and you know, I'd have to look it up.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thanks.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
You don't like them. No, I love it. But don't I?